The item was continued, so there's nothing to comment.
On item 2, consent agenda items, do we have any comments, do we have any commissioner comments on any of the other items? If not, let's have a motion for approval of all items 2A, B, C, D, E, F.
You can hear what's going on.
And I. We have a second? All in favor? Aye. With thanks to the donors.
Okay,
We have a comment on number H.
comment card for 2H, we have Michael Novick, and this is relative to the donation of a horse.
Mr. Novick?
Yeah, I had a comment on number 1. I don't understand what's happening. I wasn't here last week, so I don't know what you've continued. Have you finished electing your officers?
No, sir. It's been continued.
Okay, I don't understand why I can't comment on it then.
Because it's been continued. You can comment when it's continued, or you can comment during public comment, but go ahead on this item.
You have it on your agenda as number 1. It says continued
Sir, you want
from
to
August
speak
15th.
on item H or no?
Because
Yes, item
it's-
H.
then go
Fine, I'll
ahead.
speak on item H. Item H is in general, I've raised again and again the fact that you accept thousands and thousands of dollars donations to a department that already has a bloated budget. This week, you're accepting about $18,000 in donations. Week after week, it's $18,000 to $20,000 or more. That's $1 million a year on top of over half the city budget. I think it's outrageous. I think that one of you should sum up that total and advise all these foundations to send the money to better purposes. But this one in particular is a grant from the William H. Parker Police Foundation. There's a national controversy around the country about tearing down Confederate memorials. William H. Parker is one of the most notorious racist, openly racist heads of the LAPD ever had. Thankfully, you're no longer meeting in the Parker building, and I think that he and his foundation needs to be consigned to the dustbins of history, and if you had any self-respect, you would refuse this donation. You don't need a horse named Tiger.
We have
Thank
no
you,
other
sir.
comment cards?
May we have a motion for approval of item 2H? Commissioner Goldsmith? Second? All in favor? Aye. Okay, regular agenda items?
We're in item 3A, Department's report dated August 16, relative to the second quarter report to Board of Police Commissioners on homelessness and mental illness.
Morning.
Morning. How are you?
Good.
Morning. Morning.
We've read the report. Sad state of affairs. The things that popped to me were out of 1,647 people referred to housing, only 298 accepted. 3,353 refused placement, and like you say, that the mentally ill individuals continue to be some of the most vulnerable people. So any questions or thoughts or comments? And then I just like you guys, from the heart. I mean, we've read what you wrote. Tell us what you see and what you see coming.
Yeah, absolutely. First, if I could, I'd like to just take 1 minute and just acknowledge somebody. We had a detective. The people that put this together in the HOPE team, so we have a number that are deployed. We have 38 that are actually deployed out in the field, the officers. And what really had built up and made the HOPE teams and the concept of them have been an actually very small number. It's myself and Officer Monique Contreras, and then we have other people that are on loan. We have 2 people that are in loan to make all of these details, all these functions happen. And on August the 2nd, we had Detective Julio Estrada, who suffered a heart attack at his desk, and he was one of the players involved in the HOPE team concept, and he obviously passed. And just to take a second just to think about him, again, there's a lot of people that perform this task out of a duty, and then there's other people that perform this task out of a passion. And Detective Estrada definitely had that passion. So just wanted to acknowledge him.
Thank you for sharing that. I've heard really good things about him, and
Yeah.
really sorry for his loss and for his family's loss, and we're
Yep.
here for them any way we can be.
Thank you very much.
We will when we adjourn the meeting, we'll adjourn the meeting in his memory.
Outstanding. Thank you. As far as the report itself, again, the HOPE team is striving to do all that we can do within the parameters of what a law enforcement organization can do in conjunction with outside entities. For us, again, when we constructed the HOPE team was based on ensuring that all the responsibility didn't fall strictly on the badge itself, but it fell onto other people that have the options to have a huger and larger impact to the homeless population, and that was the relationship with LASA. They are really like the spoke, where they have all the contacts, they can do all the social outreach and all the social services, and provide the guidance and expertise that our officers, to be really frank with you, do not have. And also that partnership in the HOPE team was the sanitation, because without question, the homeless encampments now, the size of them, how the property is, how it has to be maintained, how it has to be controlled, that's something that also involves the need for an expert and for a subject matter knowledge, and so that's where sanitation comes into play. Strictly looking at what we were tasked with the Board of Police Commissioners to look at our second quarter report, we were looked at a number of things. Those included the number of contacts of homeless and mentally ill, number referred to housing, number accepted housing versus the number who didn't, the number referred to services in addition to housing, number of homeless and mentally ill, victims of crime, including the type of crimes, and then the number of homeless, mentally ill arrested and type of crimes, and then ultimately the number of categorical use of forces. Again, the one thing that we are really trying to do with the HOPE team, and I always want to acknowledge this, but again, there's always been something that's been in place for outreach to homeless population in the department. All the 21 commands had either a transient car, a HOPE car, heart car, they had quality of life cars, they had something that made an impact. But there was nothing that was ever standardized. And so that's where the standardization, we are still growing in that. So these numbers that I'm going to be talking about are numbers that are coming strictly from the HOPE team. And basically, we have built those numbers and tried to find out what is the most tangible information that we wanted to capture as law enforcement, and what's the most applicable to what we were doing for the city, and what's most applicable to what we were doing towards the individuals that we are trying to serve in the homeless population. So when I look at the number of contacts, again, and you mentioned it, the HOPE teams over, and again, some of this information is based on the first quarter as well as the second quarter, because we combined the two because we didn't have all the raw data for the first quarter. So for the contacts for those quarters, it was 7,610. And again, I think it's important to break it down and look at how we do that, because each of the teams throughout the city of Los Angeles, there's 4 bureaus, and we have one HOPE team in each bureau. And so, respectively, OVB had 1,140 contacts. West Bureau had 2,815. Central Bureau, which is definitely one of the most concentrated areas with homeless population, had 2,943. And then South Bureau had 712. Within that totaled to 7,610, and then within that number came the 1,023 of individuals who are suffering from mental illness. And again, a lot of that information has to come, it has to be self-declared, and a lot of that information comes again with the partnership with LASA and what they do. When we look at the number referred to housing, again, that's where the expertise of LASA comes into place that our officers just don't have. Most of the officers, and how we actually built the HOPE team, again, was ensuring that the individuals and the groups and the organizations that were part of it actually had information and had tangible knowledge of where they could get somebody placed if they needed, where they could get some kind of referral service, where there could be substance abuse, where there could be something that would be long-term sustainable. What we tried to avoid with the HOPE teams when it was constructed, again, there's a lot of groups out there, a lot of clergy councils and stuff that do really nice work and things that feel very good from the heart. But we wanted to make sure that we had groups that actually had long-term standings and groups that could actually help people get out of the streets. What we wanted to avoid was groups that would deliver somebody 50 pairs of pants or 20 jackets or 20 blankets. And so the groups that we connected with, the organizations that we got involved with, were very specific to long-term strategies. So with that, when we looked at the number referred to housing, again, it's on your agenda there, and it's also in your addendum. The number that we referred were 1,647. That came off of our HOPE recap sheet. The number that accepted were 298. And again, a lot of that for law enforcement, that's not really what our primary goal is or what our primary mission is, but that's where the support and the guidance and the direction of LASA comes into play. because LAHSA are the ones who actually know where they can get people into housing, where they can get them into long-term facilities, and they actually have the time and the ability to build those relationships in support with our law enforcement assets that we have. Refused referrals, again, that can go for anything. When an officer comes across somebody, they're usually in a component with the LAHSA personnel, and it can be, services can include anything from substance abuse to domestic violence intervention to child care to VA. So it's just a myriad of different things that can be put into place. And again, we had 3,358 that refused any type of services or any kind of referrals. And again, I want these numbers to be reflective because we're talking about I think it's from according to what LAHSA said, it's a 26% increase from what we had in 2016 to what we have in 2017. So basically we're looking at about 36,000 individuals that have been declared homeless by the LAHSA homeless count. So you can see again where these numbers reflect and what we're doing. The number referred to services in addition to housing, again, that's also what I talked about. We had 2,704. So those individuals, 2,000 individuals, actually took up some type of service presented to them by either our HOPE officers in law enforcement or by the LAHSA partnership that was there, whether that be substance abuse or again, domestic violence intervention or whatever it is, there was some type of services that were provided to them. When we go into the next category that was requested, it was the number of homeless and mentally ill as victims of crime. We looked again at the first quarter and the second quarter. For the first quarter, we had a total of 546, and for our second quarter, we had a total of 661, which gave us 1,207. Out of those victims that were homeless, we also noted that 52 of them were self-declared as far as having mental health issues or mental illness. We had a 1% increase for the same time last year. And also I think a lot of that goes with the increase in the population as well as the increase in the number of contacts that we have had. When you look at the number of contacts that the HOPE team has had, and again I'm going to kind of give some information that talks about since the very beginning of the inception of HOPE team, since they started, there's been over 14,276 contacts that law enforcement officers have had, and that started on basically April of last year of 16. That's when the HOPE team started. So out of those 14,000 people that were contacted, I can say without question that probably the majority of them would not have been contacted by our more routine patrol officers, by the ones that are out in the black and the whites or working gang units or crash units or whatever else they're doing. When I look at the number of homeless and mentally ill arrested, again, we saw an increase in that. There was a 49% increase. Our HOPE team arrested out of the 17,000 that we had contact with for the entire time. We've arrested 647 for a myriad of different offenses. Citywide, for homeless, there was 1,845. Again, that's a 49% increase. But I think what's important to realize, too, with the increase in the homeless population itself, went up 25% to 36,000, the one thing that we instituted when we first started to build up the HOPE team was changing the way and the manner that we categorized and collected data about the homeless population and homelessness in itself. And so what we did is we instituted a new policy to change our MO coding, our modus operandi coding. So a lot of this information, although it looks drastic, where there's a 49% increase.
Part of the increase was the adjustment in the...
That's exactly right. What we have never captured this information before. The way it used to be captured, if somebody would arrest somebody on a F-field identification card, they would write in 1942 on the address. 1942 would represent that individual may or may not be homeless, but they have no address at the time. So with our new MO coding that we instituted, it was in May of 2016, now we are really starting to get a baseline of data that we have never had used before within this organization, in this department. So although it shows a 49% increase of now, I think probably in a year, 2, 3 years down the road is when you're going to actually get kind of the real numbers about whether we are increasing, decreasing, or what exactly we are doing with the homeless population in regards to arrest. The last one I'll go into is the categorical use or the non-categorical use of forces. Again, when I look at those, our HOPE teams in 2016 had 0, RESET had 37. Again, RESET is specifically related to what goes on in Skid Row area in Central Division. And then in 2017, HOPE had a total of 3, and Reset had a total of 15. The one thing I think is important is to look at, Hope is more of a proactive outreach, problem-oriented solving type situation, where Reset, again, they are more reactive and responsive to radio calls and calls for service. So if there's an emergency call, that could be the reasons why you're seeing the disparity a little bit as far as the number of use of forces. But again, I do think it's important, too, to look at the Reset basically year to date. They went from 37 in 16 to 16, and they basically had about a 57% decrease in use of forces with the homeless population in 17 as opposed to 16. And again, that's some of the most complex homeless areas that the city has is in downtown and in Skid Row area. So with that is the overview of what you have, the information, and any questions or any specifics you would like, I'd be happy to answer them.
Commissioner Goldsmith?
Thank you so much for your work on this, and particularly I want to thank you for being so responsive after the hearing that we held on homelessness several months ago and creating this new report, and especially expanding your data collection to Reset. It's extremely helpful. So I have a couple of questions. Could you explain in a little bit more detail the coding issues behind the 49% increase?
Absolutely. Yeah, like I said before, there was really no way when an officer made contact with somebody, whether it was they were a victim of a crime or they were involved in a crime, whether it be a Part 1 or a Part 2, there was really no way to differentiate if that individual was homeless, whether he was a victim or whether he was a suspect. And so in May of 2016, we instituted a new MO coding, which allowed our record clerks that when the information gets put into whether it's an investigative report or whether it's an arrest report or a combination of the two, it will specifically say this incident involved an individual that was homeless or involved in homelessness. And that's what that does. And so, again, that's something that we had not had before. And so when we instituted that MO coding, again, you're going to start to see an uptick because you have a lot more information that is getting dumped into the system that is much more specific to the homeless population.
Okay. And can you share any street strategies you have for addressing the increase in victimization of people experiencing homelessness?
Yeah, again, I think I think luckily with the mayor's support and with the chief's support, I think we are a little bit ahead of kind of the tide of seeing the increase in the homeless population. And I do think that these HOPE teams had a big part of that. Again, I think the outreach, a lot of it is so much based on relationship building and the time and the availability of our officers to be able to have contacts with these individuals in these encampments and to build these relationships. And again, without these 38 officers that are every day going into these huge amount of encampments throughout the city, I don't think that had it not been for those HOPE teams, there would be many people who would be law enforcement officers who would be in those encampments. So again, that part of it, I think the relationship, again, on a larger scale outside of law enforcement, I think that is incredibly important to ensure the safety. Because again, instead of having a number of entities that are all involved in trying to support and serve the homeless population, acting on their own and being siloed, now we're pretty much have a business plan where we're all together. And so if an officer, a law enforcement officer, comes across somebody who needs services, that ability to have those services provided by a LASA representative is immediate, whereas before it wasn't. And so again, that's what we have done. That's what we're going to continue to do. My hope, to be very honest with you, again, we are a law enforcement organization. My hope for the future is that the funding from H and Triple H will hopefully bubble up soon, where law enforcement can start stepping out of the picture and not be part of this engagement as much. And some other entities within the city and the county will be able to have a larger and greater impact so that law enforcement doesn't have to be involved in this. That's going to have to see, what happens as the future
To that
unfolds.
point, I sent this report to a number of the service providers and foundations, and I think that to show what a glaring issue this is for us and for them. What is our relationship with the service providers and with the mainstream philanthropy that funds those service providers? How do we keep them up to speed
Yeah, the big thing that's always been part of this since we originally started the Hope Team was to, again, and I talked about it briefly, but it was about reaching out to the organizations that are involved in it and actually finding out the ones that would have a positive and productive impact in the homeless situation. And so again, I've had the opportunity to go to a lot of them. A lot of them do incredible work, but I don't think that they were mission specific to what law enforcement was looking for, and so they continue to do their work. But then there was other ones that, again, and I have a list just from a quarter list, and so there's 20 contacts that we've had with different organizations. Those included things such as Museum of Tolerance, Volunteers of America, Communities in Motion, First Presbyterian Church of Granada Hills, Motor Gospel, Santa Clara County, to get information from them, Valley Unity Peace, Communities and Schools, LA County Health Services, Central City Association, Korean American Coalition, National Network for Safer Communities, Homeless Healthcare Los Angeles, My Friend's Place, and the Los Angeles LGBTQ Center. Again, some of those, they're at a more higher level where they don't have the services they can provide, but then there's other ones like, I met with an individual from the LGBTQ Center over on Highland, and they have an amazing system set up where they're based primarily for juveniles. And so we were able to connect
Friedman Center? Yeah.
It's Simon is his name. I forget his last name, but Simon is the individual who runs it. And I was able to talk to him, and they have like 70-some beds. They're trying to get more beds. And so that is very tangible. And so that's information that went to our Hope teams.
Scan me that list.
Absolutely.
I've got an idea. Let me see if
You
I
got
can
it.
act on it. Commissioner McLean-Hill, questions, comments?
So you made a couple of comments. I'm just interested in whether you can expound upon those a little bit more. You made reference to community-based entities or entities outside of LAPD that are aligned with the mission of LAPD in terms of this particular effort. So I'm interested in the criteria that's used to determine who's mission aligned and who's not. And I'm also interested in, because there's a lot of data, I'm interested in what this data informs in terms of how we do how LAPD performs its role, and also separately how we see the need for the engagement of others to support or to, you indicated an interest in seeing LAPD step back. So how does that occur?
Okay, it was a lot of questions, so I'll try to get all of them. But
It's a long report.
it was, and there's a lot going on, so there's a lot to report. But basically, as far as the organizations, again, LAPD, we are law enforcement. We are here to provide safety, we're here to reduce crime, and we're here to maintain order. So a lot of the groups that are involved with the homeless outreach, we really depend and rely a lot on the subject matter expertise of LAWSA. Because there's a lot that we know that goes on at a divisional level or in a community level. But we really wanted to make sure that we had the leadership and
So
the
I
subject
just
matter
want to be
expertise
clear,
of
though,
our partners
because
in
you read a
LAWSA.
list of entities that you indicated you've had outreach with, and did you say over the last quarter or during some time frame? And I'm interested in how that, how you determined who would be on that list versus who would not be on that list. And you made some reference to being mission aligned. So I just wanted to drill down and understand that.
Sure. And again, this is something that we're continually expanding on, reaching out to groups and groups that reach out to us. For an example, the LGBTQ and our Friends Place, those are groups that I didn't even hear about or know about. And so they actually spoke at an event that I was at, a community meeting. And so I was able to, again, talk to them for a bit and then actually go to their places of business and talk to them and put them at a level where we could have a relationship and they could have an impact. And so a lot of it is really that. It's getting information from LASA or getting information from the different entities or the groups that I'm around or that my people are around or the HOPE teams might know of, and then from there looking at those groups and going in it. As far as the mission is not specifically for me or for anybody involved in the HOPE team. When we look at these groups, just law enforcement. We're not looking for people that are law enforcement friendly or just want to tickle our ears and tell us the great things that we're doing. We look for groups that will have the biggest impact to the homeless population that we serve. And so some of the groups that we reach out to and some of the groups that I have reached out to historically have not always been the ones that have been the most law enforcement friendly. There's some groups where you actually have to really build a relationship with before they even want to start working with you.
So again, you keep going to things that are judgments, like, and I'm not challenging the import of those judgments. I'm just trying to understand the criteria that's used to make the judgment. So when you say, groups that will have the biggest impact on the homeless population, I assume that there's some way of making that determination if that's what you're using to define or to determine who you work with and who you don't.
So Todd, why don't we talk about, broaden this conversation to include the mayor's influence on this, the mayor's office, because I think it speaks to the coordination of the mayor's and his with homeless coordinator in LASA and LAPD and DMH and all of the partnerships, so that it's not LAPD at the point of this, and actually we're part of a collaborative. Commissioner, you asked about how we are measuring, how we're informed on this, what does this data go to? One aspect of it is, in the community policing philosophy of the organization, is that we are in a collaborative formation where people who want to self-identify or we seek out, who can be part of a problem-solving effort to improve the levels of community of safety and the safety of those experiencing homelessness. So, Todd, if you would go into the leadership of the mayor's office relative to the coordination of what CBOs, faith-based organizations, what's to the commissioner's fair point, what is the threshold that determines that they are relevant or not?
And I also want to explain my intent in asking you to send me that list. I believe that the grant makers, philanthropy in Los Angeles, Southern California grant makers, which gives hundreds of millions of dollars towards homeless issues, would be well advised to have a convening with LAPD to hear these numbers and help them focus their efforts on areas that can be preventative in this way. And that's what I want to try and work towards is more inclusion of excuse me.
Why are y'all talking
More inclusion.
when McLean Hill asked a question and the white man got to jump in and make sure
You're out of order. This is your last warning.
Whoa, please, hold on. I do think it's a fair point that I did have questions pending.
Trying to expand.
Like my
Okay,
questions
let me
to be answered.
And I can answer both.
You can do both of them.
And I can answer both
Yeah.
questions
I think
without
that's a
a
fair
problem.
point.
Okay.
Again, the big part of this, when this was initiated, when it was started, was to fulfill the vision also of the mayor as well as the chief. And so the big part of that was making sure that it was a collaborative. And so again, a lot of our work, a lot of what we do does go through the mayor's office. Alyssa Orduña is the coordinator for the mayor. Brian Buckner, we go a lot through with policy. So the information we get from them, the groups that we get from them, the relationships that we get from them has been imperative. But also a lot of it, again, is that we are not trying to be the sole providers of everything.
Correct.
That's, again, where we spend so much of our time in the relationship with LASA, because those are the ones that are building the partnerships. Those are the ones that have the knowledge of the ones that can get people placed, that can get people into services, that can get people, their driver's license, their Social Security.
Sir,
Those are the ones that we depend on.
trying to run the meeting.
No, I understand. And I'm just trying to understand how it all works and where. So I'm not suggesting
and
by
ma'am,
any stretch of the imagination that.
As far as like a criteria right now where there's in a specific list, this group is in and this group is out, we don't have that. We are still learning. We are still building this. I can guarantee you our stats and our numbers, everything that we have and everything that we have instituted, the ComStat for all these homeless organizations, the statistics on everything that gets dumped in, the HOPE teams themselves, all this wasn't here a year ago.
No, that part I
So again,
understand.
that's why
but
we are still trying to
but
learn.
Stop! Don't talk over me. So that part I understand, but I do think that criteria. I mean, I'm not comfortable with the idea that because as I listen to you, and the reason I'm asking the question is I'm really trying to understand the basis upon which we are, how we're building it. And so if we're building something, then it needs to be informed by things that people understand. It can't just be, and I assume it's not, that you know of certain groups or you make a decision about which groups are in and which groups aren't. I assume that's not it. I understand and appreciate the additional broadening of the lens and and you're telling me that a number of the groups that you have initially or established relationships with are groups that are being coordinated by the mayor's office and others, so I get that. But to the extent that we are specifically conducting outreach, I assume that there's a basis for that outreach. And if it's self-identification, that's fine. Then people just know that all they need to do is identify themselves and say they want to be a part of it, I guess. But you suggested that there were specific things that you look for. So I was trying to understand what those things were that you look for in terms of making decisions about who can add value to that piece that we're seeking to do versus those who couldn't. That's really all I was trying to understand. Yeah. And I don't know that I understand it a lot better now than I did before, except to the extent that you've suggested that the mayor's office is kind of the overall convener of this strategy. So
yeah, we're again, ma'am, not to interrupt you, but we are happy to work with anybody. And I am pleased to meet with anyone. My group is pleased to meet with anyone. Smart Team is pleased to meet with anybody. But again, we are looking for groups and organizations that can connect with LAHSA, that can have tangible impact on the homeless population. And
so connecting with LAHSA is important. Mm-hmm. And if you would tell me what tangible impact is, just that one thing, then really, I'd be good.
Sure. Yeah, someone who can actually help somebody. Who can actually provide services, who can actually, render aid, who can help that person get out of the rut that they're in. Somebody who can actually make that happen. Those are the people that we really look for. People that are part of the cure and not part of the problem.
I think we would expand on that if we had other representatives of the coalition that work in a collaborative manner. There are a number of providers, as has been reported, in the Skid Row area and other parts of this county and the city that unfortunately do not work in a collaborative manner. Sometimes their solutions are actually can be interpreted as counterproductive to the larger group. So one of the concepts of this is the department not leading this is that this is a leaderless group, meaning that everyone brings something to the table, and how do we have common goals, strategies, and objectives. We have one aspect of it, but what do you bring to the table is what the Commander Chamberlain, I believe, is identifying. But also, I will say it's important in this collaboration that we all work together to coordinate those services. Otherwise, we're an inch deep and a mile wide. And this area of one of the greatest challenges in Los Angeles today is homelessness. And there are a lot of resources and people, but at times, I think, again, under the mayor's leadership and Commander Chamberlain and others, DMH, they have brought a collaborative effort together, and that's truly consistent with our philosophy. What this report, to the last question you had, which is how does this inform us? So as this report came to me and through me to this board, it was that it would be a balance, that it would have, consistent with community policing, that it would be a problem-solving approach that was collaborative and that was not just measuring beans. It wasn't just counting things. It was identifying what are the underlying objectives and how in this last quarter are we measuring some aspects of attainment of that. keeping the eye on the goal, which is improving the lives of those who are experiencing homelessness, as well as balancing the rights of the communities in which homelessness exists. Because we hear, there's a lot of focus today, and mental health, Lieutenant Bixler is here, in this report was conversations about the increase in mental health services and demands for services. This is a huge aspect of homelessness. But one of the other narratives that we're hearing in Los Angeles, and I know our teams here, is communities that are impacted by homelessness. What are the enforcement efforts of the organization? What tools are we using that are not just simply supportive, but what accountability are those who are engaged in crimes who happen to be homeless? And this report is also meant to measure some of those functions because that is an area of responsibility. As Cameron Chamberlain so well put, the desire we have is to back away from those supportive efforts and put in, whether it be private-based or organized public sector resources that can really provide that supportive environment where law enforcement can pull out of those heavily intensive supportive conversations and play more of our law enforcement role. But this is a constant balancing act. We're not there, as he's indicated in this report. I respectfully, we give this commission every quarter. I think our hope is that it's going to continue to evolve with the leadership of all the parties at the table.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I think I'm concluded my questions, and I appreciate that.
Okay, let's have, do we have any comments on this?
We have 9 comment cards.
Okay.
The first 4, Michael Novick, Peace Between Residents and Police, Gina DiPietro, and Pete White.
Yeah, I'm not going to attempt to speak on behalf of people who are unhoused or homeless in Los Angeles. They're very capable of speaking for themselves. I want to talk about the principal form of mental illness that impacts homelessness, and that's the mental illness of the people who run this country, this city, and this county, the psychopaths and the sociopaths, the white supremacists who believe that somehow the people who have no houses are the problem. And that the source of the problem is the homeless. The source of the problem of homelessness is the homeless. The source of the problem of homelessness is this system that drives people out of their homes and forces people out onto the streets. You're talking about the whole point of this presentation was twofold. One was to identify the problem of homelessness somehow with mental illness and blame it on the people who are mentally ill. And the second is to figure out how you can get your multi-million-dollar police agency focused on law enforcement more and get them out of trying to deal with the social problem. So those are both mentally ill approaches to the problem. They're not dealing with reality. They're not dealing with the causes. They're focusing on an institution which is everybody here armed, with a massive number of weapons and trying to figure out how you can use those weapons more effectively. So I would challenge you to say, again, I've raised this over and over again. The assistant chief there said you're trying to carry out this project as part of your commitment to community policing. And again, the definition of community-oriented policing put out in Police Chief Magazine and elsewhere is that it's psychological operations. It's the domestic equivalent of psychological operations in the military. It's attempting to control the thinking of the people or the enemy. And when you ask about criteria, that's the criteria they use at trying to figure out who is their enemy and how they can deal with them most effectively.
Prentice Jenkins, Peace Between Residents and Police, founder. Speaking as a man 20 years ago who was homeless here in Los Angeles. I've been in those shelters before, so I understand what's going on with the homeless, because I live with the homeless. I was homeless. There are famous last words. The famous last words of a man who said, yes, he's a great actor. I'd like to meet him someday. Those are the words of Abraham Lincoln. He was talking about John Wilkes Booth. I had the famous last words of a developer. I sent out proposals similar to this one right here about 10 years ago on the homeless. Sent them out to developers, about 15 of them. One developer got back with me, and I went back and pitched him. He was in his 40s, and he said he liked what I was doing. I was going to use the homeless to help the homeless. Now, this was about 2009. And he said he had a partner. He was in his 70s. And then I had to pitch his partner. His partner said, famous last words, "I'm not worried about the homeless." And they didn't go with it. The younger one wanted to go with it. But his partner, who was in his 70s, "I'm not worried about the homeless." He said that 10 years ago. Look at the sidewalks now. You can't even get through the sidewalks now. There are tents on the sidewalks. Why? Because the homeless population has exploded in 10 years. In just 10 years, I can't believe all the families you see, little children down there, that are walking right past dope dealers. I mean, little bitty children and their mothers walking past dope dealers. The homeless population homeless is not going to get better unless you start working with the people who have been there. And I've been there, and I know how to handle this. And it's important to remember that homelessness is not it's not a state of mind.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins.
Gina DiPietro.
Good morning, Commission. I'm Gina DiPietro, and I live in San Pedro. And I would like to say God bless Detective Julio Estrada, who passed while working on this project. I'd also like to say God bless Officer Matthew Baxter and Sergeant Sam Howard, who passed on Friday in Kissimmee, Florida, and the 4 other officers who were shot on Friday. The police officers in the LAPD are charged with providing safety, reducing crime, and maintaining order. And those tents on the streets are not helping in that department. I had the most alarming conversation with a police officer who works on Skid Row, and he told me that there are people with guns in those tents. There are many, many tents filled with guns and drugs, because drug dealers use guns to protect their drugs and for sales purposes. And accordingly, they can't go in to those tents without a warrant or some sort of probable cause without risking their jobs. They told me that we want to go in, we want to go get those bad guys in those tents, but we can't because we're worried about losing our jobs if we go in without a warrant. And that concerns me deeply. And I say, if this is a leaderless project, if LA can't handle it, if the mayor can't handle it, all right, it's time for HSI, Homeland Security, to step in, because we can't live in a city where there are guns lining our street in tents. It's not safe, and I am hoping that Homeland Security steps in and takes over. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Pete White, please. Followed
Mr.
by
White.
Mariela Saba.
So, Pete White, LA Can, Black Lives Matter, Los Angeles. So the entire country is well aware that Los Angeles is in the midst of a protracted housing crisis. Real housing, unlike the innuendo written in this report. The Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies found empirically 380,000 units of housing needs to be built to catch up. Homelessness has increased by 20% in the city of Los Angeles, and there's finally well-stated evidence of the causal link between houselessness, gentrification, lack of housing that is affordable to those who need it, and the limited supply of housing and shelter options. However, with all of that evidence, you continue to lie at a time when the truth will certainly do. For example, you stated that your HOPE teams contacted 7,610 houseless people, and of those, 1,647 were referred, whatever that means, to housing. And of that number, unfortunately, only 298 individuals accepted the various forms of housing offered. What exactly does various forms of housing mean? That's a question you should ask Chamberlain over there. You were talking about LAHSA, so I brought you the recent LAHSA housing inventory count for your perusal. Be reminded that these are countywide numbers. 23,000 housing beds across the county of Los Angeles, which is 4,084 miles, right? And in order to access that housing, you must have a voucher, a public housing authority voucher. And so when you offer this housing, we know that there's no room in the inn. You also say that there was a total of 353 who refused placement altogether. But in the next sentence, you state that 2,704 individuals accepted various forms of referral services other than housing, which makes no sense. So you would hope that the reader of this report believes that in the worst housing crisis Los Angeles has ever witnessed, only 4% of all individuals contacted accepted housing, 44% refused placement efforts altogether, and that 35% accepted referrals other than housing. It's a housing crisis. It makes no sense. I got more. My time is up. I would love to have 20 more seconds.
Thank you, sir. We'll finish it during the public comment, Mr. White.
It's a housing crisis and it makes no sense. Up here, we're listening to folks lying constantly to themselves. It's the nature of the beast. Good morning, folks. Some of us are awake and lots of us are still deep asleep. And it's so convenient and it's nasty. There is no place for LAPD to interact with unhoused people. There is no place for you to interact. You see folks as, is this person homeless? Are they a victim or are they a suspect? Those are three disgusting categories, none of which should exist. But that's how you walk. And we know LAPD sees every person of color, every person in poverty as a suspect. So you show up armed. I work with folks on the streets in my neighborhood across the city, and I am blessed to be able to work at LA Can with Stop LAPD Spying Coalition and work with people who are unhoused. And part of my hard work is to make sure there is no interaction with armed forces, because any interaction is traumatic. It's not good for our mental health that we have to deal with policing in our neighborhoods every day. It's not good. You have no place in health. So it's so nasty that we've come to a place where police are there speaking from the heart. My ass, sober off. You just because we're going to talk about homeless people, you're going to speak from the heart. Stop lying to your evil self. Stop lying. It's disgusting. An increase in arrests, 49% increase. Of course, because that is the role of LAPD, interacting with people. You're not therapists. You have no place there. You're showing up with handcuffs to arrest, to increase that nasty system that you are part of. And
next speaker, please.
The next four speakers, Jamie Garcia, Hamid Khan, General Dogan, and Ted Hayes.
So I think just to start off, we need to identify that Shane Goldsmith has not looked up once during this public comment session. So try to look up. It's the probably least amount of respect you can give people. So we need to also think about reducing funding to LAPD and directing it towards community services. So that's one of the first interventions that we should do. But this report is showing a failure of the program, further criminalization of the unhoused, and further data collection of the unhoused. So total of 3,353 refused housing. Now, it's not that we expect you to succeed. You have no place doing this work, as comrades have said before. But this is an example of a failed process where we see you actually blaming people who are unhoused. And the problem is that there is no housing. So now we have the criminalization of the unhoused. A total of 1,845 homeless and mentally ill during the first 2 quarters were arrested. 49% increase. The question is, should we be expecting a larger increase once you formalize the record management system or this improved coding system? We know that this type of crime history and data is used in programs like LASER, which tracks and traces people. The collection of data feeds LASER, so you are increasing this amount of data and this amount of tracking and tracing of people. Further, the data collection on unhoused, like the coordinated entry system and their failure to place individuals, you have also failed to help people, but now are tracking them through social service networks like housing and general relief, which we know plays into criminalization of people in these programs and possibly denies them this relief or disqualifies them from relief. So lastly, we ask, who is mentally ill, the drug abuser or the gang member, and how are you qualified to identify these people? So we know that identifying mentally ill and people with addiction issues is not the job of the LAPD, but it's the job of people who've dedicated their lives to nonviolent intervention and community-based support systems. And then identifying people as gang members. We know this is just a way for you to increase who's in databases, but we know that gang databases.
Next speaker, please.
And so we need to think about what you're actually doing. And again, I want to identify how this program is correlated to LASER. You're increasing crime history of unhoused individuals. So this cannot be seen as an isolated incident, but it needs to be seen in how data is being collected on individuals.
Thank you. Hamid Khan, please.
Seeing is a display of completely disingenuous reporting that is in front of us. And Chamberlain keeps on saying in a very innocent way that they want to disengage with this kind of process. I think the question really is, what has been the history of LAPD in this process? What's also important, and thank you, Cynthia McLean-Hill, for raising this in this way, that the issue here is that who is asking what from whom? And what does that relationship look like? And when you have a relationship between the LAPD and the residents of Skid Row, where the LAPD is clearly involved in forceful banishment and displacement of a community, so when these interviews are done, when these conversations are done, what do you think that power dynamic looks like? So I think that's really the first question when we are talking about these things. The second thing I want to talk about is about funding, and other people have raised that issue as well. Again, Chamberlain talks about, like, we don't want to be a part of this process. Well, your own administrative officer came out with a report 2 years ago where 87% of monies that are supposed to go into homelessness go to LAPD. So that's directly where they're directly involved in taking all the money away as well. And we, not to even talk about that 54% of unrestricted funding of the city goes to LAPD as well. So that's another issue. Then my colleague Jamie Garcia spoke about it, and I think what we are looking at it, that regardless of however you look at, this is what coordinated broken windows policing is. This is how it's unleashed. This is how information is gathered. But what's happening is, because this is a very slippery slope and a dangerous path that we are on, because while Reset or Safer Cities Initiative or Broken Windows Policing, whichever you want to call it, was not collecting data, because now what you have is this further compilation of data. And it's a vicious circle, it's a vicious cycle that feeds into hotspot policing, that feeds into laser policing, that informs the coordinated entry system, and all this jargon of risk assessment and data-driven evidence-based policing. This is what is happening because it's a perpetual state of criminalizing these people. So this is really a disingenuous and exposed.
General Dogon. First and foremost, no civilized organization want to work with LAPD because you can't stop criminalizing the homeless. My name is General Dogon. I'm a civil rights organizer on Skid Row. I'm also the point man on our community watch team that's been documenting interactions on Skid Row since 2005. We document public health and safety issues. And yes, the criminalization of homelessness is up because the arrest of homelessness is up because the criminalization of homelessness is up. We see it every day on our community watch team. We are documenting. I don't know what data he's talking about, but when you see horses out 3 times a day, you could just, they just criminalize folks, and you could just look at, one way to check data is look at the tickets, and then look at what they writing the tickets for, and you will see criminalization all day long. It's mass policing all day long, big time supporting the gentrifiers on Skid Row. The only social work we see them doing on Skid Row is working with the HistoriCorps bids, having private meetings with the new downtowners and developers on how to move homeless people away from your door. Walking around with the HistoriCorps bids like Captain Rena was doing last week. Him and Blair Burstein, just going around criminalizing people, having these little secret meetings. That's the social work that LAPD is doing. They're supporting gentrification. They're supporting the developers. And, of course, it's all about enforcement. They're moving people out of here in big numbers. They're writing tickets. We have a legal clinic every week. Last time we had our legal clinic, we've seen 3 times as more people as what we usually have in there. And the majority of them is for tickets from the horses and stuff like that that's coming out. So I don't care what he kind of trying to tell you about this data and that the Hope Team, I rarely see the Hope Team. The Hope Team and C3, they like Jesus. They hardly ever come around. And so just like I said, it's all criminalization. And don't believe nothing I say. Go do your homework. Go on the streets and see it. Just go hide out. Go in disguise and go hang out on Skid Row. You'll see it.
To Hayes.
I visited about 7 LAPD police stations. Last week I was at Central Division in Skid Row. I spoke to the watch commander about several things. First, I spoke to him about the fact that on the west wall of that division, I double dare you to go there. There are piles and piles of human feces and streams of human urine. He says, I know that. I see it every day. Then I pointed out that the restroom, male and female, say out of service, but they're not. There's nothing wrong with them. But he pointed out to me, we're never going to open those restrooms because people go in there and wash and smoke dope. Then I pointed out that the other divisions I've gone to, they have upholstered chairs for people to sit in, but in that Central Division, they have hard wooden benches that they use to put prisoners on. They have 2 refrigerated fountains, but they are not working. And they say, we'll never work those fountains because people come in to drink water. So when you ask me, how will the police relate to homeless people, that's how they relate to homeless people. They torture them, they abuse them, and they don't treat them like human beings. I dare you go there. I dare you go to any other division to make a comparison. I have been dealing with this thing on Skid Row with Central Division for a number of years. I think I know how to bring it to a halt. So at the risk of my freedom, which they'll probably arrest me for, I'm going to bring it to a halt. I'm going to see to it that we at least can give them a drink of water and allow them to use a toilet and allow them to use a face bowl if they want to wash their face or under their armpits.
We have no other comment cards on this item.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you all.
Have a couple of follow-up questions. I just didn't get to them, and was reminded in public comment. And again, it just goes to what these comments actually mean, or what the report actually means. So, to the issues that were raised about individuals refusing referral to housing or various types of housing, can you just be specific as to what that relates to? I mean, what are the range of referrals that are made, and how do you determine, and who determines that they're refused? Is that data
absolutely.
that you're collecting, or is that data that somebody else is collecting that you're just reporting? How does that work?
It's a mix of both. Again, the partnership with LASA, they are the caseworkers. They're completely right. They are the subject matter experts. They are the ones who know about intervention, prevention, and those are the ones that, again, go out with the law enforcement officers in the HOPE team and make the contact. So again, once that relationship is built, they give us the information, hey, we offered this, and they didn't want to take it. And there's also a lot of times, again, where it does fall on the officers. Our officers have been in the position where they have offered, hey, we can get you through LASA into VA housing, or we can get you into some type of housing, and for whatever reason it's been declined.
No, because I just from the perspective of, and I would be interested in some point in having a much more robust conversation about data collection and identifiers or non-identifiers and how it's used. I mean, I think that that's an area of significant concern, and privacy and how systems are used with respect to data once it's collected, I think is certainly deserving of some response. But separate and apart from that, I am very interested in being as specific as possible about the information that we publish, because once we put it out there as a report, it then becomes something that people use to form opinions or make decisions about. And so I would be interested in better understanding. I know Commissioner Sobroff kind of keyed in on the number of, quote, referrals versus acceptance. So that does paint a particular picture. I'd be very interested in understanding what that really means, whether it's actual housing, whether it's some shelter that, I mean, because it sort of intuitively doesn't make a lot of sense that we would have such a challenge from the perspective of providing housing, and yet the availability of, to refer all of these people, and that people are saying no. So it's just something I think that we need to, if we're going to report it, then we need to disaggregate it and report it in a way that we identify the source and actually what it is. And I'm not sure, as I read that paragraph, what it actually reflects as it relates to what's occurring on the ground.
Absolutely. And again, I think we can define and get the data down more, and that's something we are striving for, because when this whole process started, we realized in law enforcement with the HOPE teams, we knew that we could never build enough infrastructure to support housing. That's not our role. That's not our job. So again, that's where the correlation and the collaboration with LAWSON, with other members who can provide that entity in that direction, is so imperative and so important. So you're right. There's definitely a room where we can define it, but anecdotally, it's really hard too, because there are incidences where, like through LASA or through our officers, where they do have an opportunity, especially with the VA. The VA is probably one of the most acceptable ones as far as getting somebody placed, but we've had a number of incidences where individuals won't go into VA for whatever reason, whether it's a substance abuse issue or whether it's alcohol, or whether there was one individual in the Valley who had a 42-year-old female that he was with, and the female had a substance abuse issue, and he knew that if he went into the VA, she would be out on the streets, and so he decided to go out on the streets. So what we ultimately ended up doing with the support of LASA, and they took it from there, is get her into a substance abuse and then got him into a VA apartment. So those are the little anecdotal things that are always something that the officers and the LASA has to contend with. But we knew when we went into this that we would never be in a position where we could get the housing issue done. That's not our role, and that's not our responsibility.
Yeah, and I'm not, so let's just, so we're all really clear, I am 100% clear what it is that the mission of the LAPD is as it relates to other people's missions. So I understand totally that, LAPD isn't a social service agency, isn't responsible for housing, etc. So my real focus here is on making sure that things are clarified as it relates to what we are saying about what we're doing and what the impact of that is or isn't. That's all. And the story that you just told, to me, just underscores the way that data can look like on a page versus what's real. So if you say that housing alternatives were offered and refused, but then you add to that, well, if you have a substance abuse problem or issue, you can't do this anyway, then that's not an offer and a refusal that makes any sense to report in that way. So that's all I mean by disaggregating and really, because data and reports paint pictures. And the picture that we want to paint is one that reflects the reality on the ground. And sometimes maybe we just shouldn't be, there's certain data, if we can't provide it in a way that reflects the reality on the ground, we shouldn't be putting it out. We're not the source for that data. So that's really just all I'm trying to understand here. Sure. And finally, I do want to acknowledge that this crisis that represents an enormous failure of government, It's not something that the department has, created or is rushing to embrace. So I get that. But if people of intent and goodwill are actually trying to figure out how we navigate through it, we have to be able to disaggregate roles, responsibilities, and to see, what's unfolding. And I don't want our So to the extent that we have a role, and we do, I just want to make sure that we are clear about what that is and how it's working on the ground, and that our data is thoughtfully both presented but disaggregated so it paints a picture that is accurate. That's the best we can do.
Okay, thanks. Let's move on.
We do need a motion, sir, for receive
No,
and
there's
file.
no motion. It was just a review and file.
A motion to receive and file.
So moved. Second?
A second.
All in favor? Aye.
Thank you. We're now on item number 4, report of the Chief of Police, Chief Moore.
Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity.
Morning, Chief. Sir, will you stop disrupting the meeting? I'm going to ask you once more. Will you stop disrupting the meeting? Okay, thank you. Chief.
Commissioners, good morning. And on behalf of Chief Beck, who's away on some well-deserved vacation time, I want to provide his report. First, as to significant instances and activities, this last Wednesday we completed the police fire games, so I'm happy to state that everyone was able to travel back to their homes, and I think law enforcement and fire, the men and women of our professions engaged in a healthy competition, and we're still collecting the medal count. Chief Beck is very interested in seeing how we came out of that, and we'll see how we'll. But I'm happy to say that it was a tremendous success here in Los Angeles. I think it also showcased Los Angeles as a world-class city, and that it is a venue that can be that can sit on a world stage and support people who come to engage in such worthwhile activities. Secondly, on this past Saturday, the Special Olympics of Southern California hosted a plane pull with the Law Enforcement Torch Run organization. This is an organization of, again, law enforcement from Southern California that comes together to support individuals with intellectual disabilities, some 26,000 here in the Southern California area. And this fundraising activity also allowed LAPD to muster some 6 teams to pull a perfectly good airplane that had its engines off in a timed competition. And it raised over $130,000, which, again, I think was significant in the sense that not just the money is the funds raised go to an important cause with these men and women that have these challenges and provide for them health care and sport and other life services to make the best of their challenges and improve their quality of life. But it also gives law enforcement an opportunity to engage in productive and dedicated efforts to partner and form relationships with another aspect, another member of our community. As to crime statistics, this past week we ended up with 8 fewer homicides, so we have a 4.5% reduction year to date in our homicides. I'm also happy to state that in our victims shot category, that while we have still had far too many people who have been shot and injured in the city, that number is now a 5% reduction overall, so 36 fewer individuals this year versus last. Our total violent crime, however, is still increasing. We're at a 4% increase year to date. It's in particularly the 2 areas of our challenges, as we reported last week, that being street robberies and aggravated assaults, both of those occurring in the central and southern part of the city. So our work there continues. And as overall today, we have a 1.4% increase in overall Part 1 crimes. Some 80,000, to put this in context, some 80,000 crimes have been reported this year to date in Los Angeles, and that's an increase of 710 versus last year. Again, the increase is almost entirely in street robberies, so our efforts in partnership with our communities is to try to not just identify those chronic offenders, but also improve our community members and their resilience in a challenging environment. These are oftentimes robberies that occur at a bus bench or can occur just walking down the street or exiting a store. So people are encouraging our communities to be mindful of their surroundings. Texting and walking is not just a safety hazard, but oftentimes is being used as a as a circumstance for people to prey upon innocent victims and take those phones, and then unfortunately there's a market for those phones. So that is one of our significant challenges. Gang crime is down 7.1% overall for the year, and our gang-related shootings were down more than 10% this year versus last. As to officer-involved shootings, this year we have 12 fatal officer-involved shootings. That number last year stood at 15. That is a 20% reduction. In our guns recovered, we have a 12.5% increase. And moving over to our traffic, we have continued to be challenged on our hit and runs, both on our fatals and serious injuries, as well as on our motor vehicles versus PED. Both of those continue to be double-digit increases. And our bicycle-involved collisions involving serious injuries and death, however, is the only bright spot. That number is down at 64 this year versus 75 last year. And in 2015, that number was 79. So we are seeing one area of improvement. Still, far too many people are suffering serious injuries and deaths as a result of being a pedestrian or a bicyclist. And our efforts with Vision Zero, working with Department of Transportation, continues to improve, not just the enforcement aspect of this, but the engineering and public awareness. And moving to our sworn personnel and civilian statistics, 9,973 are on our payroll. As far as sworn personnel, civilians are 2,870. That's a vacancy of 478 individuals. We have 685 reserves officers and specialist volunteers, and our cadets number 2,172. And I'm available for any questions. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions? Public comments?
We have 6 comment cards. We have Michael Novick,
Mr. Novick?
Mr. Jenkins, and Melina Abdullah.
The only well-deserved vacation that Chief Beck deserves is a permanent vacation. He should be relieved of duty and sent packing. Chief Moore is kind of boasting that you only killed 12 people so far this year, or the reduction compared to last year. I've been in Los Angeles since 1982, and for many, many years, the LAPD killed about a person a month. And now they're almost doubling that. You had 21 or 22 killings the last 2 or 3 years. I think it's unconscionable. And if you have any sense of duty and responsibility as a Board of Police Commissioners, you will deal with that problem by getting rid of Charlie Beck and holding the department accountable for the number of people they're killing.
Next speaker.
Mr. Jenkins.
Mr. Jenkins?
Prentice Jenkins, Peace Between Residents and Police. Good morning, the Honorable Commissioner Soboroff. This happened last week. It's in the downtown Los Angeles news. He said, why I had to leave downtown. He said, I love the community, but it no longer felt safe. It's by a gentleman by the name of Josh Albrechtston. He said, I moved here on a whim, and it was one of the best decisions I ever made. I found an amazing community, a place like no other, and each and every day something amazing about downtown Los Angeles changed for the better. He said, I thought I'd never leave until I had kids, but then I noticed a difference. I saw more and more people getting harassed, assaulted on the streets. It stopped feeling safe. Even though I live 8 blocks from Skid Row, the historic core was even worse. I banned my girlfriend from going there alone. When a senior citizen was killed on the corner of 8th and Olive Street, I knew downtown Los Angeles had become too dangerous, and it was time to go. I left downtown because of this. I miss it every day. I see what's happening to my friends who I left behind and who cannot easily just up and go. He says, I remember when Jacob Van Horn was assaulted online. For 20 minutes, we didn't know where he was. He said, unless the mayor, the city attorney, our other elected officials, the LAPD and local neighborhood leaders start to take the open-air drug mark of Skid Row has become seriously, he says, I have no doubt that more and more people will follow my lead, throw up their hands, and move on from downtown Los Angeles. The future of downtown Los Angeles is at stake. Remember that developer said, I'm not worried about the homeless. These are the people that were paying for his condos. That man's gone now. That means that condo's not being paid for. And downtown will become a ghost town.
Thank you, sir.
Melina Abdullah, followed by Chet Hayes.
So I started not to speak. Actually, this started ticking before I got up here. Can you reset
start
it,
it
please?
over. Sure.
Okay. So I started not to get up and speak, but then I thought about what it is you just reported and what was just reported from up here. And I think it's really important in this moment. So last week, you all remember that you had me arrested for trying to speak back to your comments on Charlottesville. There was a time when commissioners' comments were agendized and we were able to speak back to them. Instead, you all decided to have an impromptu speech condemning Charlottesville. What's illuminated here and what happened in Charlottesville gives us an opportunity to think about how you're all complicit in white supremacy. You're all complicit in white supremacy. So as you sit here and condemn the white supremacy that's carried out by people carrying tiki torches, as you celebrate the removal of Bannon, well, some of you might, I don't know about Steve Soboroff, might celebrate the removal of Bannon as if Trump is so much better, or Ryan's remarks as if he's so much better than Trump, or pat yourselves on the back because you are not among the named white supremacists, you're failing to see what's happening in this country. This entire system, as you try to pretend like, putting more police on the streets is the answer to homelessness, is complicit in white supremacy. You are engaging in white supremacy. You have a moment right now to decide that you're going to be on another side, that you're not going to be part of the many sides that Trump identifies, that you are going to be on the side of freedom. And I think it's important for you, those of you who want to be on the side of freedom, for you to stand up against the systematic institutional racism that's just been reported on. The systematic institutional racism that said the killing of CJ last week was in policy. You have a moment to stand up, so do that. And fire Charlie Bett.
Your moral character.
Addicted to being human. That means the normal functions of being human, like elimination, excrement, is going to occur. And I double value, look at the outside west wall of Central Division and come back with a report. And then ask the watch commander what's going on. And he'll point out that we won't let the homeless use the restroom. We will not let the homeless use the refrigerated water fountain. We turn that water off. Now, I do believe that that's a civil rights violation of some kind. That every police division has a restroom and a water fountain, except this one. And you want that, don't you? There isn't a shopkeeper or a business person on Skid Row who doesn't have a problem occasionally with homeless people. But the LAPD can't tolerate that. They can't suffer these abuses the homeless inflict upon them. And it's your responsibility to see if we can toughen up the police department, where they can at least allow a person to drink a cold water on a very hot day. At least allow a person to urinate and defecate, instead of doing it outside. Now, they might be doing it outside as a punishment for the police department. I think that's a clever pardon upon move. So, look into that. Because I'm going to look into it, because the watch commander was very bold and very defiant. We're not letting any homeless people in here. They might use drugs in the restroom. The police can't do it with a drug user? Come on. That should be an ample opportunity for a trainee to practice dealing with drug users, huh? Thank you.
Next speaker, Yvonne Michelle Autry, followed by Hamid Khan.
Yes, so Rome has fallen, or this is the beginning of the fall of the Roman Empire, which has been prophesied in Revelation. It is incremental, as many of the last will be first and many of the first will be last. That's God's word. So you have a choice, just like Melina said, we all do. This is harvest. You're either in the world or in the word. So you have a choice whether you're going to be complicitous in heaven, which is coming, or the dismantling of this Roman Empire, a.k.a. this New World Order, Caesar, white supremacy, because it will destroy itself. And those riots were just the beginning. Anything evil and corrupted will destroy itself. As the first Roman Empire fell, so will this Babylon, white supremacist Roman Empire. The New World Order is just the last attempt of Satan to raise its head in the guise of white supremacy. Okay, the John Browns will be complicitous and will be targeted, just as the House Negroes will be in complicity and will be protected by the principalities of this world. But God will destroy all that do not. All will submit before the throne. So, in speaking that, I want to reveal what I have just endured. Attacks by undercover police officers attempting to draw me into some type of Waukesha Wilson sex scandal and murder, okay, involving Mexican mafia, who are my maintenance men, illegally entering my room. I believe the Jewish owners of my building, Isaac Shomoff and Barker Management, have commissioned or hired them because they are cheap slave laborers. They are illegal, and they are allowed to illegally enter my room, leaving calling cards of urine and feces and men's semen, okay, trying to harass me. I'm not their sex goddess. Okay, for the record, I'm not their ladder and their elevator for these people from Mexico, Central and South America, bringing their gods to persecute us. And again, the breaking down of black people and other people in submission to this one world government.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Who's the next speaker?
The next speaker is Hamid Khan.
Mr. Khan? Thank you for your comments. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Khan. It has been posted numerous times. It's posted now. It's posted on the internet. Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, they are.
They're posted online, and if you'd like, we'll get a list of them, and I'll have it available to you, okay? Today. These are the 4 events that, I believe the 4 events is what that's at. I'll get that for you today.
Okay, and the detail of
Again, I can't go back and forth with you. I want to make sure you get those. Those would be great questions to ask at such a public outreach meeting. And again, I don't know that. Thank you. Okay.
But I think those meetings are tomorrow, so we'll have to get you.
No, I'm going to get the list today.
It's been posted for a week.
Whoa, 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 whoa! Is it on whose website is it posted on?
Okay, yeah. No, there've been public postings. I've had them. I've seen them for a week.
You know, we have dealt with websites in a lot of our work sober off. So please don't try to come back like that, because if it's been challenging.
Just saying.
We can't find it. We can't find it.
Well, I'm not saying you can't find it. I'm saying I did.
It's not there.
That's on purpose. Why don't you show us? Tell us. We forgot. Tell us specifically.
We will within the next minute. Okay.
You're not tricking anybody. Okay.
Next speaker. Are you done, or is your time still going?
Just relax. The other piece is sued the LAPD about a year and a half ago on the suspicious activity reporting program. And now we're getting a runaround on the Public Records Act request that we had. They had given us a deadline of July 29th on releasing documents on laser, and we're still waiting on that. We keep on communicating with these people, so that program still remains completely out of order. We had asked about the crime data. We're getting a runaround on that. So there was another lawsuit that was filed by a professor from UCLA, and apparently there were some changes made. Apparently we're being told that there's some staffing now as well in the Department for Discovery section, but we're still getting a lot of pushback on these things. So, I mean, which is pretty much directly under your purview. So we would like to get those things released as soon as possible.
Commissioners, for the record, the LAPD online under alerts, SUAS meeting dates is posted. And on that website, if you go to it, you'll see the letter that identifies the 4 locations and the meeting date, which is Wednesday, August 23rd from 6:30 to 8 p.m. at the locations as identified: Marvin Browdy in San Fernando Valley, Friendship Auditorium on Riverside Drive, Peck Park Recreation Center in San Pedro, and the Westwood Recreation Center on Sepulveda. Thank you. They are, yeah, LAPD online.
There have also been public announcements released. Numerous. No?
Are you having all of them at the same time? No.
Yes?
Can you tell me what the page's number? You said it's under public announcements. What are you talking about? Where is that posted? What public announcements?
All this suppression is not making it better for you, it's making it worse. People are getting angrier. Stop playing games, man.
Okay. Next speaker.
We have no other speakers on this item, sir. We're now on public comments.
This is what you call one day 4 events in the community on an issue, on a drone that is so sensitive, and where there's complete rejection. So this is the plan for...
Next speaker, please.
We're on public comment. We have 12 comment cards. The first 3, Michael Novick.
Mr. Novick.
Michael Novick, Prentice Jenkins.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Will you or will you not stop disrupting the meeting?
Will you or will you not give us the information directly?
I'm going to ask you one, and I'm going to ask both of you, because if you don't, we're going to take a recess. And then when we come back, we'll take another recess. Will you, or I'm just asking you, will you stop? The information is posted. Okay, for next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Michael Novick. Is he here?
You know, I just, before the next speaker, I mean, I do think it is abominable and really does fly in the face of our rhetoric to have an item of such obvious public interest be disseminated in a way that people that are looking for it can't find it. And it's like other things that we do. We can say, I mean, we can be technically right. It's posted, but information that we want out gets out. And it is hard to imagine that information that people are looking for that they can't find isn't being buried. And we will stand on this idea that we did public outreach and got public input, but it is just not credible when we do these kinds of things.
Will you review?
She's speaking. She's speaking. Have some manners.
Are you finished?
Have some respect, man. Look at it. No intellect.
Are you finished or no?
No manners. Lowly. Lowly.
Mr. T-Fank, will you review the number of times that that this item?
She's speaking, and you try to speak over her.
I will
Sir,
also
this
say,
is your last warning.
No, just, it is also...
Last warning. No more.
It is also...
Once more, you're out.
Hugely problematic that there is nobody on this dais that seems to be able to answer in a comprehensive way pretty basic valid questions like when, where and how, like what resources, what effort are we putting into public outreach and engagement? And if we don't want to do that, let's just say it and just not pretend. But if we want to do it, we have to do it in a way that it's effective.
Okay, now I'll ask Mr. Tefank to, the number of times, I know it, how many times the public announcement has been released through the Public Relations Department, how many times it's been on the internet, how many times it's come to the commissioners. I know that I retweeted it once.
Yeah, thank you.
Or it's been sent to your email. Don't say that because it is. You just haven't seen it. Go ahead, Mr. T.
Mr. Vice President. Excuse me, Mr. Vice President. As I understand it, there has been a press release issued for the last week every day that I have seen pushed out by the department. It's being pushed out by the department. I've also found the item is on lapdonline.org, and it is listed under alerts at the lower portion of the face page. It says SUAS meeting dates. And I do not know how long that has been there because it has not been my responsibility. And I do know that the item has been pushed out quite frequently by the department. I cannot give you the number of times it has been pushed out. I did have our staff in the last few minutes make copies of the letter that Chief Moore just mentioned, and we'll have copies of them that we can distribute now.
August 14th was news advisory, was one retweeted, sent out. Okay, so we're going to move on. Next speaker.
We have 12 public comment cards. We have the first 5 speakers.
Is somebody going to take the
Mr.
speaker's
Novick,
mic, or we'll just move
Prentice
on?
Jenkins,
Mr. Novick, no. Mr. Jenkins, yes, sir.
followed by Dan and Melina Abdullah.
Thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry. There you go. Sorry.
Prentice Jenkins, founder of Peace Between Residents and Police. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men and women to do nothing. Edmund Burke. That's going to test all of our integrity because Charlottesville was actually the shot at Fort Sumter, the first shot of the Civil War. And the first thing you do when you're about to engage in a civil war is you start talking. You use rhetoric. That was done during the election. The next thing you do is you send out feelers, something like Charlottesville. That's the second thing you do. Let's see who shows up to protect liberty and freedom. If those people don't show up, there'll be no liberty and freedom on the other side. So Charlottesville was just a test. That's the second phase. The third phase will be shooting. They'll start shooting to see if you shoot back. And the fourth phase is martial law. Now, I've made 8 observations here over a period of 3 years. 7 of them have come true. 7 observations. They're not predictions because, I'm not Nostradamus. I'm just very observant. I observe my surroundings. I listen to what people are saying, whether they're good or bad. I listen to what bad people are saying. And I listen to what good people are saying. And I determine what they mean based on what they say. I listen to the subtext, because there's subtext in everyone's conversation. When you hear the subtext, you'll understand what people are saying. So, as Edmund Burke said, what side are you going to come down on? I'm going to come down on the side of America.
The next 3 speakers. Go ahead, sir. I'm sorry.
Sure. Hi, Daniel Gus. I'm a contributor to City Watch LA. I have guest hosted the KFI AM 640 Sunday Morning News. Not just as a guest, I have hosted the show on KFI. I want to bring to your attention an article that I had last week in City Watch LA. Mr. Soboroff owes the city of Los Angeles between $3,000 and $15,000 for decades of dog license fees. I have the records of that. I am asking you, and I'm going to write again a follow-up article. Mr. Soboroff has sent me at least 24 really bizarre responses to why, as a wealthy man, he hasn't paid his fees to the city. Most recently, he laid blame on his children. He threw his children on the bus, and I'm going to address that in my next article. I am asking you, commissioners, withhold your officer elections until we get to the bottom of why Mr. Soboroff has for more than a year been aware that he owes the city of Los Angeles thousands of dollars as he looks at his phone right now rather than listen to the comment. So Mr. Soboroff is owed thousands of dollars to the city, and he hasn't paid it. He has owed it for years, and you can't hold city elections asking everybody else to be law and order citizens when Mr. Soboroff pals around courtside at Staples Center and doesn't pay the city the debt that he owes. He has thrown his children onto the bus. The records show that he and his wife owe the city thousands of dollars. If I put it in writing, I could be sued if it was malicious. It's factual. CityWatchLA.com, KFIA640.com. Type in Soboroff, type in my last name, Guss. He can't hold an office position if he owes the city money. Thank you.
Next speaker.
The next speaker, Tiffany Guerra, followed by Nicole Goluskin and Ted Hayes.
So 2 weeks ago, the Commission was presented with a letter from 3 of the groups present here today with demands related to the cadet program. And we have not heard back from this board with regard to those demands. So we'll be pursuing this complaint with the city attorney as well as the city council and the mayor's office. And the reason we're pursuing this is because we believe in the preponderance of evidence in this case. We know that no police chief can fail to see a pattern of offenses being committed by officers against members of the public and people in your own department being brutally repeated quarter after quarter and year after year and not be aware of it unless it is a willful and deliberate choice. And that is unacceptable because your protection of your reputation, your officers, and the cadet program has real consequences. There are people that your officers harm and that they will harm because what we know of child and sexual and domestic abuse is that it doesn't just happen one time, but it's a pattern that gets repeated. And according to the National Center for Women and Policing, at least 40% of police officer families experience domestic violence in contrast to 10% of families in the general population. Did you know that, Shane? Were you aware of that, Shane? Police commit domestic violence more frequently, and they do it with their weapons and the different tools at their disposal, tools of the state and the protection of the state. 29 teenagers alleged rape over the last 4 to 5 decades or sexual assault by LAPD officers while they were engaged in the cadet program. Programs in 28 different states have been investigated or are being investigated now for the same problem, but you all don't have policies in place regarding how supervisors are trained, how the workday was managed, what communications between cadets and supervisors were appropriate. Does anyone see that as being an issue? Shane, you approved funding to this 2 weeks ago. Is that how you review programs at Liberty Hill when they cross your desk? Is that the type of program that you invest in? Shut down the program.
Next speaker, please.
Nicole Goluskin.
Morning.
Hi. I'd like to start by saying I'm scared. Hi, I'm Nicole. I'd also like to begin my comment by asking if there is a volunteer on this board who would be willing to respond to a penal code trivia test. A very simple question, really easy. Anyone? Not a single person? No one wants to respond to a penal.
I'm sorry. Your public comment. We don't sit on the dais and respond back and forth.
Oh,
that's
I
not the
called in
protocol.
advance and asked.
My apologies. I'll be happy to talk to you outside. You can
Sure,
give it to me.
okay.
All right.
My question, I'll answer it for you then, was going to be, is suicide in and of itself against the law? Meaning, is a person who is suspected of being suicidal a person who is suspected of being a criminal? And the answer to that is no, it's not a crime. What I'd like to talk to you about is police response to 5150 calls, mental health intervention calls, and specifically use of force and detention of individuals suspected of being suicidal by LAPD officers. In order to explain, I'm going to tell you what happened to me and how I was irreparably harmed by the LAPD, and I'd specifically like to single out an LAPD officer, Officer Moyers, number 37846, who I believe should be removed from the force for using excessive force in a mental health intervention call. I only have 43 seconds left. Essentially, a call was placed to the LAPD. Someone said that I had poison in my house, quote unquote poison, that I was going to use to kill myself. I do have a mental health issue. I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I do battle with suicidal thoughts. I'm not suicidal. This officer, he handcuffed me, and I looked like this. And I asked, do I look like I'm going to harm you or myself? And he said no. But he handcuffed me anyway, really tight. Do you think that I could have just like 10 more seconds because of the miscommunication that I got?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that, yeah, essentially this officer cuffed me so hard that my a tendon in my arm was damaged all the way up until about 2 inches below my elbow. I asked him to release the cuff, just loosen it up several times. He refused. He got on the phone with my psychiatrist, who confirmed that I was not suicidal. At that point, he was released of all liability, but he stayed for an additional 30 minutes.
Okay, Chief Moore will chat with you outside, out the room. Thank you very much for coming. Next speaker, please. Thank you.
The next three speakers, Ted Hayes, Paula Miner, Hamid Khan.
Mr. Hayes?
Let's see if you can fit this cliche in. See no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil. The Brown Act says this: authorization to clear the room when a meeting is willfully being interrupted and readmission. In that, well, let me do this. If individuals willfully interrupting the meeting, the legislative body, which are you, conducting the meeting, may order the meeting room cleared and continue in session. Here's what you say. Recess. A recess is not continuing in session. But this says continue in session. It doesn't say abandon the people's business, abandon the people and go hide so you can see what the police do to the people you say clear the room. So, why do you want to go into recess when you clear the room? Because you don't want to be here when the officers bring out the batons, bring out the mace, and for God's sake, they might end up shooting someone in a crowded room like this with 50, 40 people. But you can't leave. You've got to stay and be a witness, for God's sakes. And see what these officers might do if people don't clear the room. So, here's what the chapter also says. Criminal penalty for violation of the chapter. Each member of the legislative body who attended the meeting of that legislative body and the violation of this chapter is a misdemeanor. you commit a criminal act when you walk out of here because you violate that section on clearing the room.
Did I take my card?
No.
Hater.
Good morning. First of all, I'd just like to acknowledge Commissioner Soboroff and Commissioner McLean Hill for at least apparently pretending to pay attention when we make public comments. I know some of the commissioners just ignore us or seem busy doing other things, so I appreciate the fact that you two at least look at us and seem to be listening to us, because I think the comments of the community are important. You know, a lot of times this particular body disregards what we say and think it is not important, but we do represent the community. And again, as we have repeated, the reason that a lot of people who speak to us and tell us these are some of the concerns don't show up here, again, is because the time and location of those meetings. And talking about time and location of meetings, I just got a copy of the letter from Chief Moore, or Assistant Chief Moore, and the first sentence says LAPD will hold a series of community meetings throughout the city to seek public input on the drones. And looking at the locations identified, they are not throughout the city. I do not see any addresses of these particular meetings that are going to occur in what we identify in South Central Los Angeles, Central Los Angeles, or East Los Angeles. These particular communities are part of the city. Because it appeared to those of us, and we have many people in our group who regularly monitor the various sites that you all have told us are the sites that we should be looking for information, that we did not find this. I'm asking that the commission schedule additional meetings to cover those parts of the city, those communities that have been omitted. And I think it's really important. Again, this is a travesty.
Thank you.
Hamid Khan, followed by Pete White, Jamie Garcia, and Yvonne Michelle Autry.
It is abominable. It is a travesty. It is something that, you know, just trying to, in a very sneaky way, to organize these kind of community meetings is completely bogus. On an issue that is so sensitive, on an issue just across the freeway, the Sheriff's Civilian Oversight Commission, majority of them came out telling the sheriff to permanently ground the drones. Right? So, I mean, there's a body right across the freeway which has taken a position, but of course this body approved the launching of the pilot program, much to the rejection of the community. But then to throw this shit at us like that, I mean, if this is what community outreach looks like, then it's really, really fucked up. It is completely fucked up, to the point that, you know, it falls into, it's not even about a conspiracy, it's a blatant disregard. It's a complete disregard and a disrespect for the community, for the people who've been doing this work, for the people who've been gathering petitions, for the people who've been writing reports, for the people who've been doing this research to come back and throw it on our face. So I think not even, and then secondly, going back to the spaces themselves, communities that are directly impacted, whose lives have been ruined and intimidated and threatened by ghetto birds and helicopters and police presence. Of course, you know, why are we going to bring something that will talk about militarized presence of drones in those communities? Because yes, they would reject them. So I think this whole process completely discredits, you know, what is at play right now. So not only they should be scheduled in these places, these should be stopped. These community events should not happen. And we should start from the beginning and go back to the drawing boards, and then start scheduling these things. Otherwise, I mean, like, you know, I mean, if this is the way you're going to do transparency and community oversight, then of course, like, you know, the writing is on the wall. So what else do we expect from you? So you can do a little bit better than this. Yeah.
Pete White, Jamie Garcia.
So I just want to start by saying that I'm also extremely surprised, and this is really a complete failure. and the data that gets collected at these meetings should not be considered sufficient, because I just want to draw a comparison, and I want to see how well you do. When we had our town hall about drones, we had 200 people present. So I want to see if you can even gather that many people. And that was in what we did with our outreach, bringing our community members in. And you did a week's worth of outreach. That's it? Do you know how busy people's lives are, and you do a week of outreach? I mean, not only do I do community service as a volunteer, but I'm also a nurse, and I couldn't change my schedule at that time. As a nurse, my schedule comes out within 6 weeks, and I have to plan. I'm sure you couldn't make it if you didn't have time to plan. I mean, I wonder how many of you will actually be present to see what the community has to say. So this is really a shame. And, you know, just to review what we've done, I'm almost like surprised that we didn't get a personal invite. And it just demonstrates again how much you disregard what we do. Because there's actually emails that exist that state don't listen to them, don't engage with them. So this is the kind of rhetoric that's coming from you guys, based on people who do research, who spend their times trying to understand these things as community members. You don't even regard our opinions. They're completely, you know, don't engage, don't listen to them. 3,000 petition signatures based on volunteers. I had a team of about 6 people that went out and did that. How many people did you have actually go out into the communities and inform them that you even have drones? Like, how many people in LA even know that this drone fight is going on? We had a report that we actually researched. We spent our time with a team of about another 6 people that researched drones. And then we spent time gathering with folks, talking to them, teaching them about what drones are. So I'm just really, with all the resources and all the fucking money you have, this is the respect that we get. It's like, I'm not even surprised. Because this is what I expected. Because you fail. You constantly fail. You guys suck.
Next speaker.
Yvonne Michelle Autry.
Again, a resounding no in the consensus against drones. In one of the richest cities in the world, there should be no homeless. Obviously, it is an industry beyond the homeless service providers. This is a melanin-rich industry for genetic experiments, for sex slaves, for your counterintelligence officers, for those that are sacrificing, people that have been put in the trash. I'd like to speak on behalf of black women, women who are being ritualistically abused, experimented on in this femicide. And again, the Hispanic, Mexican, Latin men predominantly are being used and given this okay to harass us again because they are cheap slave laborers for the business, and especially the real estate owners who do not have to pay them minimum wage because they are undocumented. Okay, I see most of the construction jobs going to Hispanic people, not black people, and I'm not anti-Semitic or Hispanic. I have friends of both races, but this is the status quo. So I'm speaking in exposition of these experiments. The femicide in Central America will not be perpetrated here by low-level Mexican mafia that want to regulate single women living alone. This is America. This is not Mexico. And I'm exposing the fact that the LAPD, along with the Israeli intelligence, CIA counterintelligence, are giving these Hispanic men the okay to rape and to murder and to infiltrate and to harass and to torture, along with the LAPD that are raping and murdering black women like Waukesha Wilson and like Taisha Miller, like Margaret Mitchell, and some of the other women that have been raped, that have been injected with heroin, they've been sprayed and shocked with electronic weapons. I'm exposing this. And this has got to stop. And I know, again, the Zionist Jewish people are recruiting and allowing this breakdown in preparation from this one world government when people will be broken down to that level of disparity.
Next speaker, please.
Okay, there are no other comment cards on this item. We're now on item number 6.
Just quickly, because I noticed that the department's, I'm sorry, I don't know his title.
Commissioner, I assume you're referring to Mr. Rubenstein?
Yes. That he just came in, and I don't know if he has anything that he could share about the outreach related to these particular groups of meetings, because I'm curious and interested in both what we've done in order to support the 4 meetings that we're having tomorrow.
So we put out a press release pretty much every day for the past week, a couple times a day, 2 times a day, putting it out to our full contact list of all of our media outlets. I did a perusal to check and see which particular outlets did broadcast that message out, and I've seen it in Spanish at NBC. Southern California Public Radio, KPCC, put a story out about it. And that's just a quick perusal.
So I'm a couple things. So just because this isn't, I've been informed an agenda item. I can ask questions, you can provide information, but we're not going to have a discussion about it. And I really just want to know what the. Oh, I can't even ask questions.
You've asked them a question.
So no, all I want. So basically, so for instance, so what let me then just reframe my question. When did the notice go up on the website? Mm-hmm. I see that there was a tweet on August 16th. When did you begin the outreach, and to whom was outreach conducted? And finally, what do you have, or who else supported our outreach? So if you send out a press release, who actually did something on it?
So the extent of our outreach has been the press release right now, and then the actual public meeting where we will have public information officers available and command staff. Say that again?
I'm only talking about notice about the public.
So the notice of the public meeting came out in the form of the press release, which is how we notify of all public meetings. Nothing more than that, other than that, and social media. And on our website. And it went on our website the same day we started putting that notice out, which was, if I'm correct, a week ago, but I don't have the exact date that it first went out.
Thank you.
So, and just one last aspect of the 12 times that it's been published, that feed goes, I think the commissioner's question was, who is on that feed?
That feed is dozens of news agencies and City News Service that then rebroadcast it out on any and all news agencies that are in Southern California. It's a pretty extensive list, and it does go to everybody.
So just one final, if you could simply send to me the entities that actually picked up, not who you sent it to, but who
gets it, who published it. Yes, we'll go through and do a list and see who published it. But I did, again, just sitting back here, looking to see if that message did go out, and it did go out on many mainstream outlets, and not just in the last day. It's been, I think that was 4 or 5 days ago on, again, NBC. So. But we'll do a look and check it out.
The only thing that has come out of this morning on KPCC, that's it. Nothing.
On the tweet that I put out, it had 521
retweet.
Yeah, not retweets, but interactions. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we're back on the agenda. We're on item number 6, and we have one public comment card. That person is no longer here. Michael Novak. The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss item number 6A, 1 and 2 in accordance with Government Code 54957. In closed session, item number 6A1 was discussed and the chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. In closed session, item number 6A2 was discussed and the chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. Mr. Vice President?
I want to make a motion to adjourn go ahead.
Mr. President or Mr. Vice President, I'd like to move that that the commission's meeting be adjourned in memory of Detective Julio Estrada, who recently died at his desk of a heart attack.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jen Mahoney in Studio City. You're watching LA City View Channel 35, where you can get the best in culture and arts. It's our city, it's our channel.
Hey, just go!
Hi, I'm Chris Van Allsburg. You may have read some of the children's books I've written, Jumanji, Polar Express, or Zathura. In this episode of NASA Connect, you'll learn about the history, mythology, science, and math that relates to a total